Grim Encyclopedia.
In 1703, Tsar Peter the Great looked at a frozen, mosquito-infested swamp at the edge of the Baltic Sea. His advisors saw nothing but mud and death. But Peter saw an empire. He ordered a window to the west. But to open it, he needed flesh and blood. Thousands of serfs were dragged in chains to the banks of the Neva River. They had no tools. They dug the freezing mud with their bare hands. They carried earth in their shirts. Resource scarcity required authoritarian measures. In 1714, Peter issued a radical edict. The construction of stone buildings was strictly prohibited throughout the entire Russian Empire, except in St. Petersburg. This forced all professional stonemasons to migrate to the new capital. Furthermore, a stone tax was implemented. Every cart or ship entering the city was legally required to bring a specific quota of building stones as an entry fee. The city was literally imported stone by stone. But Peter had a problem that absolute power couldn't solve: physics. You cannot build heavy stone palaces on a swamp. The mud swallows everything. So they drove millions of wooden piles deep into the unstable earth to create a floor. And the workers? They died of dysentery, malaria, and the freezing cold. They didn't have graveyards. Legend says that when a worker collapsed, they were often thrown into the foundation pits, becoming the very mortar of the city. Technically, a river delta is not land. It is slow-moving liquid. The first enemy is the soil. It is a wet sponge of peat and clay. When you place heavy stone on it, the water squeezes out, causing differential settlement. One side sinks faster than the other. Walls crack and crumble before the roof is even finished. Then the delta trap. Strong western winds push the sea back into the river mouth. The water has nowhere to go. The river flow reverses. It doesn't drain, it drowns the land. To survive, Peter built through the mud. Millions of wooden piles created a friction skeleton deep underground. St. Petersburg stands on a sunken forest and the bones of the dead. Against all geological logic, the capital stands. This was not a miracle, it was hydraulic brute force. Peter's vision of a new Venice was not just aesthetic, it was a technical necessity. The famous canals were actually drainage channels designed to lower the high water table of the delta. To stop the soil from sliding into the water, kilometers of riverbanks were encased in heavy granite. They raised the ground level one cart of earth at a time. St. Petersburg is an imperial capital that exists in defiance of soil mechanics. A city of stone floating on a liquid grave. It was so hostile that the Italian traveller Count Algarotti grimly noted that here, ruins make themselves. He saw that if you stopped building for a day, the swamp would simply take it back by night. But Peter the Great did not care for the laws of nature. He chose to build his capital right on the enemy's doorstep. Even the great philosopher Denis Diderot looked at this plan with disbelief, stating that placing a capital here was like placing the heart at the tip of a finger. It was dangerous, it was unnatural. Yet that danger was exactly the point. As Algarotti later admitted, Peter wasn't just building a city, he was hacking a window to Europe with an axe. By driving piles into this impossible swamp, he was forcing the Russian soul to harden into granite. This city became the anvil where a conqueror nation was forged. That finger, which Diderot feared would be cut off, instead reached out and choked the empires of the north. St. Petersburg was not just a city, it was the imperial crown, forced still onto Russia's head by the sheer, terrifying will of a genius. At the dawn of the 18th century, Russia was not an empire, it was a massive, archaic kingdom isolated from the rest of the world. While Europe was building modern fleets and cities, Moscow was still living in the Middle Ages. It was a nation paralysed by old traditions and disconnected from modern commerce. Geographically, it was a prison. To the north, the Swedish Empire controlled the entire Baltic coast with an iron grip. To the south, the Ottoman Empire dominated the Black Sea. Russia was completely landlocked. It had no warm water ports, no navy, and no access to international trade routes. Its only exit was the port of Archangel in the far north, which was frozen solid and useless for 6 months of the year. Russia was essentially suffocating. It was a giant with no way to breathe. Without a new path to the sea, the country was destined to collapse into irrelevance. This was not about glory, it was about survival. Peter was not born into safety, he was forged in trauma. At 10 years old, he stood on the Kremlin steps and watched a brutal mob butcher his family. He saw his uncles thrown onto pikes. That day the boy died and the tyrant was born. He hated Moscow. He hated its darkness, its chaos, its old ways. He fled the palace. While other princes learned poetry, Peter built a toy army in the mud. He played with real cannons and live ammunition. He grew to be a giant man who worked with his hands, obsessed with ships, mechanics and order. He travelled to Europe incognito, not as a czar but as a carpenter. He learned to build empires by building ships. When he returned, he didn't just want to rule Russia, he wanted to break it and rebuild it from scratch. St. Petersburg was not just a city to him, it was his revenge on the past. The gamble paid off, the window was thrown open, and the fresh air of Europe rushed in. Suddenly, the frozen giant had a heartbeat. Through St. Petersburg, Russia traded fur for technology, timber for telescopes. The Baltic Fleet was born here, turning a landlocked kingdom into a naval superpower. The stagnant boyars were replaced by scientists, admirals, and architects. Peter didn't just build a city, he installed a new operating system for the entire Russian Empire. But the granite foundations would be tested by fire. 2 centuries later, under the name Leningrad, the city faced the apocalypse. In World War II, the Nazi war machine surrounded it, cutting off all supply lines. The siege of Leningrad lasted nearly 900 days. It was a living hell of starvation, extreme cold, and relentless bombardment. 1 million civilians died. But the city refused to fall. Peter had built it on bones, and its people proved they were made of iron. They became the shield that broke the enemy's spirit. Today, the scars are healed, covered in gold and velvet. The city stands as the cultural soul of the nation. The Winter Palace, now the Hermitage, holds one of the greatest art collections in human history. Its canals have earned it the title Venice of the North. It is a place of breathtaking beauty, where the sun refuses to set during the white nights, illuminating a skyline that still respects Peter's vision. No building in the centre dares to rise higher than the Winter Palace. From a swampy marshland to a global metropolis, from a tyrant's dream to a hero city. St. Petersburg remains Russia's eternal paradox, a city built on water that reached for the stars. Peter the Great didn't just build a capital, he forced a nation to open its eyes. And looking at it now, one thing is certain, they never closed them again.
Grim Encyclopedia.